seats if you can, yeah? Good morning, everyone. Let me just kick off the session while waiting for, I know there's some other people that are moving around going for a bio break or so, but I'd like to welcome everyone to the second panel for this room. Yeah? And of course, I'll welcome the speakers as well. I won't go through their complete bio for now. What I will do is I'll introduce them a little bit longer later while asking the first question. Yeah? That makes it easier for all of us and also more efficient in terms of time. As most of you have noticed, we've gone away with a lot of presentations and focus more on panel discussion. What we really want to do is have a policy dialogue on, at this moment, ESG and manufacturing and trade. Focus on the CBAM because, as you know, just last month we started let's say the pilot run for CBAM for the next 2 years. Yeah? And I think there's a lot of learning point that we can start discussing on it already. We will run about 60 to 70 minutes, yeah, for this session. And we hope to have more time in the end for questions from the floor. Yeah? So I also encourage everyone to ask questions from our distinguished speakers. Yeah? Good. Then let me start off how we designed this panel. So what we've done is we have, as you can see from the stage, 6 speakers. We've done 2 from the government, so 1 from the Vietnamese government and 1 from the EU, from the Danish embassy. We have 2 from the, let's say, NGO academia, so the non-government organization, and we also have 2 companies. One is MNC, which is Airbus, and then the other one, local company, Vietnam Airlines. So that's how we designed the program, and I think you can see some of the speakers already on the slide, so I will skip that. Yeah. Good. So just for our panelists, so what I will do is I'll do a bit of short intro of your bio, which is still not on the slide. And then I'll jump right through to the question, to the first question, right? So that's easier for us. What I would just like to request is that to keep your answer within 2 to 3 minutes so that it will allow us to give also time for all the other speakers and hopefully more time for Q&A, yeah, which I think we missed in the first panel. Yeah? So hopefully you can also cooperate with us. And also for those people asking questions, again, try to limit it within 1 to 2 minutes, the question. Yeah? Good. There are 5 key topics that we want to focus for this panel. Yeah? So first is really understanding CBAM because it's a very hot topic and its implications to Vietnam-intensive or carbon-intensive industries and companies. So very, very important. Second one is, that's why we have MYT here, is really on legislation and policy challenges in implementing CBAM for Vietnam industries. And of course, the perspective also of the EU. Yeah? That's why we have the Danish embassy here. Third is to really look at ESG framework. I think in the earlier panel, that's already been discussed a little bit. But now we look at it not from a building perspective, but more from the manufacturing and trade perspective. Yeah? Sustainability reporting and classification, for example, for companies. And then we have case studies that is coming in from more on the multinational level perspective, and then from a local Vietnam perspective. Yeah? Hopefully, in the future, we can also attract more SMEs, yeah, to join us. Unfortunately, today we have, of course, Vietnam Airlines and Airbus, but I think a lot of the learnings that we will get today, we will also hope to share, yeah, through the White Book and the Green Book to the SMEs, yeah, which forms the bulk of the economy of Vietnam. Good. Then I'll go through it. So, panelists, speakers, I hope you're ready. Then I'll start off with our distinguished guest, Mr. Hong Van Tam. Yeah, Mr. Tam is the Deputy Head of Climate Change and Green Growth from the Ministry of Industry and Trade. He's been doing 10 years handling many topics related to climate change and green growth. So, Mr. Tam, I just want to focus on maybe 2 questions already right away. First one is, what are the main policy mechanism in Vietnam that relates to CBAM? Second is, in the long term, which I think is more interesting, what happens after the 2-year pilot is, how does CBAM incentivize the sustainable transformation of Vietnam's manufacturing industry? Has the government made any preparation when CBAM coverage expands to other key exporting products such as textiles and agriculture Yeah, so for those who are not so familiar, CBAM is very much limited on the carbon-intensive industries, right? So you're talking about steel, iron, fertilizer, energy, hydrogen, yeah? But in the future, 2025, 2030, it's going to be expanded, yeah? Which I think will hit a lot of the industries in Vietnam. So I'd like to address that questions to MYT. Mr. Chan, please.
Xin chào quý vị khán giả. Trước hết là xin cảm ơn Aerocham đã có lời mời và cho tôi được cơ hội tham dự một cái diễn đàn trao đổi một cái nội dung, cái chủ đề tôi nghĩ rằng là rất là nóng liên quan đến CBAM trong thời gian gần đây đối với Việt Nam. Thế thì liên quan đến câu hỏi của anh Frederick thì các cái cơ chế chính sách mà trực tiếp liên quan đến CBAM thì thực ra CBAM cũng mới xuất hiện trong thời gian gần đây và chúng tôi cũng theo dõi thì cũng biết là CBAM cũng dần dần hình thành, và trong thời gian gần đây vừa rồi thì bắt đầu từ mùng 1 tháng 10 thì tất cả những cái doanh nghiệp liên quan đến cái ngành lĩnh vực mà do CBAM quy định, trong đó Việt Nam có ngành thép, ngành xi măng, là phải khai báo cái số liệu hoạt động liên quan đến phát thải khí nhà kính đầu tiên, nộp vào 1 tháng 10 và họ sẽ xử lý trong giai đoạn từ nay đến tháng 1 năm 2024 thì sẽ có những cái bước và cái lộ trình để CBAM hay là cái cơ chế của EU này có những cái hướng dẫn cụ thể, thì tôi nghĩ rằng họ đã thông báo là trong vòng 3 năm tới thì họ sẽ có những cái hướng dẫn cụ thể. Tuy nhiên thì đến giờ phút này thì phía Việt Nam chúng tôi cũng và các đồng nghiệp của tôi theo dõi về cái chủ đề này thì cũng biết rằng là bên phía EU cũng chưa có cái hướng dẫn nào cụ thể về cách tính, cách xác định các cái tín chỉ carbon do CBAM quy định, đặc biệt là vấn đề tính toán cái mức phát thải khí nhà kính đối với các sản phẩm mà nhập khẩu vào châu Âu trong thời gian tới theo quy định của CBAM. Thế thì đối với phía Việt Nam thì hiện nay như cái phần phiên trước thì tôi cũng biết là đồng nghiệp của tôi là anh Thịnh bên Bộ Xây dựng cũng đề cập đến các cái cơ chế chính sách, thì có lẽ là tôi cũng xin chỉ điểm nhanh lại thôi. Về các cái chính sách quan trọng nhất mà liên quan đến CBAM là cái quy định của Luật Bảo vệ môi trường năm 2020. Thì lần đầu tiên Việt Nam mình có cái quy định về tính toán kiểm kê và phát thải khí nhà kính cho cấp lĩnh vực và cấp cơ sở. Thì trước đây là chúng ta chỉ có kiểm kê khí nhà kính cấp quốc gia. Thế và cũng trong cái Luật Môi trường 2020 thì cũng quy định về cái kế hoạch giảm phát thải khí nhà kính ở cấp cơ sở và cấp ngành. Thì có nghĩa rằng là trong luật đã quy định những vấn đề liên quan đến giảm phát thải khí nhà kính, liên quan đến kiểm đếm, kiểm kê và MRV, đặc biệt là MRV rất là quan trọng trong cái tiến trình mà thực hiện các quy định của CBAM. Thì cái đấy là những cái khung pháp lý cao nhất ở Việt Nam hiện nay là Luật Bảo vệ môi trường, và tiếp đó là cái Nghị định 06 thì cũng đã quy định cho các bộ ngành, bộ quản lý lĩnh vực, trong đó có Bộ Công Thương chúng tôi sẽ phải ban hành những cái quy định về kiểm kê và MRV phát thải khí nhà kính cho các cái lĩnh vực và cho các cái cơ sở nằm trong phạm vi quản lý. Thì hiện nay theo cái quyết định số 01 năm 2022 của Thủ tướng Chính phủ thì Bộ Công Thương chúng tôi có khoảng 1.662 cái cơ sở phát thải khí nhà kính phải kiểm kê khí nhà kính, và họ sẽ phải thực hiện nghĩa vụ kiểm kê đầu tiên vào năm 2024. Trong số 1.662 cơ sở đó thì cũng có rất nhiều, cỡ khoảng trên 100 cái cơ sở của ngành thép là cái ngành mà chịu tác động của CBAM. Thế còn đối với những ngành mà liên quan câu hỏi thứ hai của anh Fabric thì nhiều lĩnh vực khác như là dệt may, da giày, rồi các cái rượu bia, nước giải khát, rồi là thép, rồi hóa chất cũng sẽ phải thực hiện kiểm kê theo quy định của chính phủ. Và đối với cái chính sách hiện nay thì Bộ Công Thương cũng đang dự thảo cái thông tư hướng dẫn về kiểm kê và MRV cho các ngành lĩnh vực thuộc phạm vi quản lý của Bộ. Thì dự kiến là chúng tôi trong tháng 11, có nghĩa là khoảng cuối tháng 11 tháng này, thì Bộ Công Thương sẽ ban hành cái thông tư này. Thì đấy là cái liên quan đến câu hỏi đầu tiên về những cái chính sách quan trọng mà liên quan đến cái cơ chế CBAM mà tôi có thể chia sẻ với các quý vị, và nếu có anh chị có thể hỏi thêm trong cái quá trình trao đổi.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tam. Then I jump into the perspective from the EU. I'd like to introduce Ms. Jennifer Pam. Miss Pam is currently the Regional Advisor on Sustainable Value Chains at the Embassy of Denmark in Vietnam. She has previously held positions at the global development consulting firm Dalberg, the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where she focused on Denmark-US development cooperation and Denmark's engagement in the World Bank. and the Danish Refugee Council. She has also led and facilitated sustainability courses through global institutions and initiatives such as INSEAD, Unleash, and Race for Oceans. She holds a Bachelor of Commerce degree from Queen's University in Canada and a Master's of International Business and Politics degree from Copenhagen Business School. So, Ms. Jennifer, Ms. Pam, I just want to probably look at it from the perspective of the EU. What are the EU's key rationale and framework for the introduction of CBAM? What are the implications of CBAM in the sustainable global value chain?
Hello. Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you so much for the opportunity to come out here today and talk about CBAM. It is a critical cornerstone piece of EU climate legislation. So I'm very happy to also see the interest that there is here in the room. So jumping straight into your question. So the EU entered the Green Deal, or adopted the Green Deal alongside some very ambitious climate goals back in 2019. And CBAM has then come later on here in 2021 as an important measure or an important initiative for us to be able to actually achieve those goals, which were to reduce our reliance on greenhouse gases or fossil fuels, as well as to reduce our climate impact. I think there's some motions that I'm hard to hear in the back. I can speak a little bit louder, but maybe also. Thank you. Yeah, so CBAM is our way to ensure that. Is this one better? All right. Okay. So CBAM is our way to ensure that we're actually able, that we have the instruments necessary to achieve the goals that we've committed to. And it does so in a number of different ways, right? First of all, it prevents the tendency of carbon leakage that we've seen previously when we've tried to implement a carbon price on certain carbon-intensive sectors. And it ensures that sustainability doesn't become a barrier for business, that when doing business in the EU, for example, where there is a higher, where there are higher and stricter requirements on environmental friendliness, that doesn't become a negative factor in a business's ability to compete on the market. And then finally, there's of course the hope that, that through measures that are included in CBAM, that we're able to encourage global climate action, that we create the incentives that are necessary for businesses and for governments elsewhere to also implement similar targets for their own industry. Of course, we do recognize that it's not also so positive, that there is a necessary period of transition. We recognize that the administration behind CBAM compliance is going to be tricky, because the type of carbon reporting, for example, that's going to be required as part of CBAM is new, not only to companies here, but really to many companies in the EU as well. So that is definitely one of the challenges that we're looking into as we move forward with the implementation of CBAM.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ms. Pham. Yeah, so that's very good, because I think that's very important to understand where the EU is coming from. Yeah, I was wondering whether there's already a determined or let's say agreed timing, but it looks like it's still a work in progress. So I hope the learnings from Europe we can translate it to Vietnam as we do the transition in the next 2 years. Yeah. Then I move on to the academe. We have a representative from the Foreign Trade University, Dr. Dao Ngọc Tien. He's currently the Vice President of Foreign Trade University here in Hanoi. His work focused on trade policy and the international economic and integration process in Vietnam. He consults for MIT, other ministries and departments, and the Vietnamese enterprises as well, to effectively implement free trade agreement commitments, like the EVFTA, for example. He works as a senior expert for international technical assistance projects in Vietnam, such as STAR Plus, EU Mutrap, Arise Plus, and also GIZ, with the German aid company. So I'll go straight, Dr. Chen, to the question. So now I look at it, what are the potential impacts of CBAM in Vietnam? So what are potential overall impacts CBAM for Vietnam? And maybe if you can share any detailed research or forecasts on the impact on the sector by sector, or those sectors that are really very much relevant, that are under coverage. And based on the research, is the academia optimistic or pessimistic about the prospects of CBAM implementation in Vietnam? Dr. Tien, please.
First of all, thank you for the Eurocham and the organizer for giving me the opportunity to be here to share our opinions. Relating to the overall impact of CBAM, so I mentioned by the representative of MOIT, the current sector that's subject to the CBAM is quite limited with only 5 sectors. So it depends on, there are a lot of the research carried out to estimate the impact of CBAM on the trade of the EU partner country in general and Vietnam in particular. It depends on the output of the sector, the export of the sector to the European Union, and it also depends on the current CO2 emission of the country. So the calculation, the model are a little bit different. However, in going direct to the question, the current, the estimate on the impact of CBAM to Vietnam, given the current regulation, is not big one, because among 5 sectors that is currently subject to the CBAM, which account for only 3% of the output of the GDP of Vietnam, and among those output is only 12%, 12.6% of the output is exported, and the proportion of export to the European Union is a little bit, is also smaller. The second point is it is the estimated that the impact of GDP would be a reduction of the GDP of Vietnam. However, the calculation, the number is only 0.1 billion in 2030 and 0.2 billion in 2035. So it's not a big number in Vietnam, for Vietnam. The by sector, going into detail by sector, among those 5 sectors, only a few sectors is impacted. Those are the iron and steel, and the aluminum and the cement. For the other 2 sectors, the impact is very small, especially even the electricity, there's no export from Vietnam to the EU. And those sectors are impacted much. Biggest one is on the aluminum export from Vietnam to the EU, which will affect, will reduce the export value by nearly 5%. And the second one is iron and steel, is 4%, and also the cement is very smallly affected. So given the current regulation on the CBAM, we see the small impact on the Vietnam trade in general and the trade to the EU. However, from the academia perspective, I'm quite optimistic about the prospect of the CBAM in Vietnam. Why? Because the CBAM is the first one regulated by the EU, and I think it will be as the stimulus for the implementation of all of the efforts to respond to the climate change, to reduce the carbon emission of the country. So it's the target of the country. If we compare the scenario with the implementation in Vietnam or without the implementation in Vietnam, in case of the CBAM regulation, the saving for the country of Vietnam is estimated around nearly 0.5% of the GDP. So it's the big number, and it will be served as a stimulus for the country to proceed to facilitate the activity for the reduce of the carbonization in the country. So I'm optimistic because it will be the stimulus to encourage all the stakeholders in the country to act more quickly. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tien. So that's very good to hear, yeah, that you're still optimistic, and I think the impact is still pretty minimal, at least for the ones that are, for the sectors that are covered now, yeah, so that's very encouraging, yeah. So then I move on to Mr. Florian Beranek, yeah. So again, Florian I met before when he was still working for Unido. He's a lead senior expert on responsible business development, holding an MS degree on CSR and ethical management from the University of Applied Sciences in Vienna, Austria. He has top senior knowledge around responsible business conduct, supply chain compliance, and sustainable development, including international standards, frameworks, conventions, and business platforms. He's been living here more than a decade in Southeast Asia and China, specifically also in Vietnam, working mainly for UN organizations and other international development partners like Switch Asia, as well as national and international business platforms. So I'll switch a little bit since Florian, the CBAM is not a, let's say, not a big impact. I'll go a little bit into the ESG framework and reporting. Yeah. I want to get your thoughts on the importance of a national ESG framework in supporting business compliance. Yeah, because I think in the end, you need to be able to report and monitor all of this. And how should that framework be structured in terms of reporting requirements, KPIs, key performance indicators, and if there are any international standards or frameworks that you can already cite as reference, that will be helpful for us. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Eric, for this extensive introduction. Thank you very much for being here today. And you raised now so many questions. This normally is a consulting contract over some $40,000, $50,000. For BSF, maybe 10 more. Okay, I came here 2009 to Vietnam with a project. Now this is running, yeah. So I came here 2009 with a EU-funded project on corporate social responsibility for the textile, footwear, electronic, and for these three industries. So I have to say we were 15 years or 12 years, 13 years ahead of time. Or nothing happened in between. Because we were talking all these topics which today are called ESG, before they were called RBC, before they were called CSR, before they were called corporate citizenship, before they were called business ethics. And that's actually where I started. Business ethics, this is what the core is about integrity, it's about doing the right things in the right way without needing rules. So Albert Camus once defined integrity in a very simple sentence. He said, integrity has no need of rules. You just know it's wrong to kill, you know it's wrong to steal. So this is a basic requirement. I would highly recommend to everybody who is in business, please, first come back to your common sense, to your natural radar of morality, of ethics, and then do your business decisions. If you do so, you don't have to worry about all these requirements. I'm really, really serious. If you're a good businessman or businesswoman, then you can comply with that. So what is coming now? Now we hear ESG, CSRD, and all these topics. I think you heard about them a lot. I tell you, these things are not as hot as they are communicated in the moment. Why? Because it's a lot of old stuff, which most of you in Vietnam, on the Vietnamese side, have to follow already now with code of conducts applied by your buyers. All of you who have a business in Vietnam know what I'm talking about. So the content will not necessarily change a lot. The problem which I see coming is that the European Sustainability Reporting Standard, ESRS, so another acronym you should remember, is extremely extensive. It has 1,136 data points. So indicators to report on environmental and social issues, 1,136. Now we say, oh my God, who should manage this? On the European or on the buyer side, but also on the production side. So don't worry. Nearly all of them are not mandatory to report on. I will then explain in the second round maybe how this is really working. But the problem is, for you as a producer here, you do not know on which you are asked to report. Because even in the textile industry, it can be H&M is asking you about the waste indicator, maybe Adidas is not asking you. And this can make it extremely complicated. And that's why I think it's so important that EU is really taking efforts together with European companies and the Vietnamese companies directly work in supporting programs to enable them to manage this jungle of regulation, which is a challenge, but at the end of the day, what I said before, do the things right, and you don't have to fear that. It's a burden, it's an administrative burden, mainly on the European side. If you comply here and do the things right, I don't see a big issue. But again, the EU has to really, really take action and help companies here to master that in cooperation with businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Florian. It reminds me of my company, right? So I wear a Eurocham hat and also a BSF hat. And our CEO is always very active in telling the government that you are killing the chemicals industry in Europe because of all these massive regulations, reporting requirements. So then there's a lot of movement outside of Europe, yeah, which doesn't help, for example, countries like Germany, yeah, to prosper and to actually support industries. And I could only feel, for example, the non-European companies, the SMEs, the other companies here in Vietnam, the Vietnamese companies, when they have to face the same issues, right? If we cannot do it, for example, as a European company or as a German multinational company, how much more? Right? How much more difficult it is for Vietnamese companies? Yeah. So then I don't steal much more time, but I'll go to a European company. So I hope she can also sympathize with me. We have a guest who flew over from Singapore, from Airbus. Ms. Helen Berger, she's the head of international cooperation and sustainability for Airbus in Asia Pacific. So happy to have you here. She's supporting the deployment of Airbus sustainability roadmap and engaging all stakeholders towards common net zero carbon target of Airbus. She completed her master's degree in strategy at HEC Paris, France in 2003. She used to be a strategy consultant specializing in the aerospace field, both in France and Japan from 1999 to 2011, and led projects on strategic footprints, supplier and program management, and M&A. So I'm happy to have you, Mr. Berger, and I hope you can share with us for an industry like the aviation sector, yeah, that is going to do all this reporting, going into this decarbonization and net zero target. Specifically for Airbus, what are the engagement initiatives that you are doing? Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting us, and very happy to participate today. So as you mentioned, aviation is a so-called hard-to-abate industry. It's in terms of decarbonization, it's a large challenge for all of us in the industry. In October 2022, the ICAO, so the International Civil Aviation Organization, reached a historical milestone in agreeing to so-called long-term aspirational goal, which means all the members agreed to reach net zero carbon emission in 2050, which sets the target, and then it's for each member country to, based on their local circumstances, to decide how to reach it, what is the best way, country per country, to deploy it. Now, as Airbus, we operate in over 80 locations. So we are observing what's happening country per country, and we have fully embraced that 2050 ambition. Being an aircraft manufacturer, very much engineering oriented, so we like science. And we have committed to science-based target on how we will reach 2050 net zero target. So concretely, that means as an aircraft manufacturer, we were the first OEM to commit to those targets. And when it comes to our scope 1 and 3, so our scope 1 and 3 CO2 emission, we have committed to reduce by 63% by 2030. And I can later develop what we're doing. But what we also did is, because we are part overall of the aviation industry, we have committed to support and contribute and reach the target of reducing the scope 3, so the fuel emitted through flights, by 43% by 2035. So, and that's what we are working on together with our suppliers and our customers to reach those goals.
Yeah. So maybe just a follow-up question, yeah, when you say 66 and 53, because I think there's a big discussion on a lot of people are talking about scope 1 and 2 at the moment, right? And I think there's a big discussion now. When would companies start committing to scope 3? And a lot of the things that we're finding out is scope 3 is actually even a bigger element. And I want to understand from an Airbus, from a manufacturer, what's the percentage of scope 3 versus, or out of the overall 1, 2, 3? I mean, what's the number? Yeah, because I know in the chemicals industry we're talking about 70% scope 3 and then 30% scope 1 and 2. If you look even in other companies, it's like, for example, manufacturing companies, it's 90% almost scope 3. Yeah, so the scope 1 and 2 is only 10%, right? So we're only doing net zero for the 10%. So I'm wondering how it is for the Airbus, for the aviation industry.
So actually, for an aircraft manufacturer like Airbus, the percentage is even more than what you mentioned. Our scope 1 and 2 is 0.8 million ton CO2 versus over 400 million ton for our scope 3. So we are way beyond the 90% scope 3 versus scope 1 and 2. And this is why, as an aircraft manufacturer, of course we do our part on the scope 1 and 2, but we want to support the entire ecosystem to address the scope 3.
Got it. Yeah, yeah. Then it's a lot of topic on SAF, yeah, which is our next discussion. Thank you. Then our next speaker is actually coming in from a local perspective. Yeah, so we have Mr. Chung from Vietnam Airlines. Yeah, he's the director of corporate planning and development, responsible for planning and implementing the company's strategy, network, and fleet planning, scheduling, airline alliance, pricing, and revenue management. Mr. Chung has served Vietnam Airlines for more than 20 years and has garnered invaluable experience in the aviation field after holding various positions at Vietnam Airlines, Pacific Airlines, and Cambodia Angkor Air. He graduated with BA in Economics from the Hanoi Foreign Trade University and Master in Management of Innovation and Project and Entrepreneurship from Nantes University. So I'll go straight Mr. Chung in the question, right? So if we look at it in terms of the readiness, how do you evaluate the technology readiness of the aviation industry, especially the Vietnamese one, towards decarbonization in Vietnam? Yeah. So for example, as I mentioned, the use of the SAF fuels. Yeah. Have there been any comprehensive plan or any or specific policies or regulation to support the decarbonization of the aviation sector, such as carbon pricing, use of SAF, yeah, so fuels, yeah, special fuels for aviation, yeah, or so emission reduction targets, yeah, please.
Thank you, Rocham, for having me in this forum, and thank you, Eric, for the question. Talking about the technological readiness of the decarbonization in Vietnam, I'd like to talk about, the first is about the aircraft technology, or the new generation of the aircraft. The new generation of the aircraft is estimated to help the allies to reduce the average fuel consumption per flight by about 15 to 20%. But the increase of the number of flights, or it will cause the increase of the fuel consumption. So the contribution of the new generation aircraft to the decarbonization is still very limited. The disruptive innovation of the aircraft technology, like hydrogen aircraft or electric aircraft, it will take about more than 10 years to be available commercially. So we don't expect the contribution of this technology to the commitment of 2000 net zero in 2050. The major contribution to the decarbonization in aviation is expected to be the sustainable aviation fuel, the SAF. And different studies from different organizations like IATA or the Air Transport Action Group is also estimate the contribution of the SAF to the decarbonization in aviation to be around 60%. So the major contribution will be the SAF. technically, SAF is ready and they are available in many countries. But we do see that we need a lot of research and innovation also to reduce the cost of the SAF production and also to increase the quantity of SAF. For the time being, SAF only contribute to only 1% of the aviation fuel. So, and the price of SAF is also 2 to 4 times higher than the kerosene fuel. So we do see that the technology, in terms of technology innovation for SAF is still not very well developed. And also in Vietnam, SAF is not available at the moment. So no SAF production, no SAF distribution now in Vietnam. So it's not really ready. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chong. Thank you, Mr. Chong. Yeah, so I spent 10 years with Shell before in Malaysia and Philippines, and I'm very, very interested with, I was a process engineer producing fuels, yeah, Jet A1 for a lot of the aircrafts, and I can imagine that you really still need to import a lot of this. Probably in Singapore is the nearest source of SAF, right, if you need these fuels, yeah. But I think it can be made. It's just a question of the willingness, again, of the consumers like us to pay for that differential of 2 to 4 times the price, which is, yeah, let's say staggering, if I may. Yeah. Then I go back to Mr. Cham. Yeah. So I think I have another question that's very interesting for a lot of people, especially to the MOIT. Focusing on the SMEs. Yeah. So Vietnam is mostly comprised of SMEs. Yeah. We're talking about big companies, but I think SME is the backbone of the economy. And they're very limited in terms of financial and technical resources. Yeah? So I think it's very important that when ETS or even CBAM later on is officially introduced or expanded in Vietnam to cover the SMEs, how will the government cope with these challenges in implementation for Vietnam companies? For example, difficulties in monitoring emissions data. We know it's always difficult, the implementation part. Writing the law is one thing, but implementation is another. And how does the government plan to incentivize or maybe also penalize businesses to decarbonize? Or if they don't decarbonize, then you put in more tax, like what we do for EPR, which will be covered in the next topic, yeah? When they're not doing the decarbonization in their production line. Yeah? Stam, please.
Hello. Ok. Cảm ơn câu hỏi của anh rất là thú vị. Thế thì liên quan câu hỏi này thì tôi cũng có một số trao đổi như sau. Thực ra thì theo luật bảo vệ môi trường và nghị 06 như quyết định số 01 của Thủ tướng Chính phủ thì tất cả những cái cơ sở mà có cái mức tiêu thụ năng lượng trên 1.000 tấn dầu quy đổi một năm hoặc là phát thải trên 3.000 tấn CO2 tương đương một năm thì sẽ nằm trong cái danh mục các cái cơ sở phát thải khí nhà kính phải kiểm kê khí nhà kính. Có nghĩa rằng là những cái cơ sở này sẽ phải thực hiện các cái nghĩa vụ về kiểm kê, báo cáo, đo đạc và thẩm tra cái kết quả giảm nhẹ của các cơ sở đó. Thế thì tuy nhiên thì theo quy định của luật thì chỉ các doanh nghiệp mà từ 1.000 tấn dầu quy đổi một năm trở lên thì cũng là doanh nghiệp mà cũng khá là lớn. Tất nhiên cũng không phải là doanh nghiệp nhỏ. Tuy nhiên thì với cái chính sách về định giá carbon toàn cầu mà trong đó cái cơ chế CBAM là một trong những cái tín hiệu để thông báo, cảnh báo với các cái doanh nghiệp ở Việt Nam, không những là doanh nghiệp lớn mà kể cả cái doanh nghiệp vừa và nhỏ cũng phải suy nghĩ đến những cái vấn đề liên quan đến giảm phát thải khí nhà kính, tính toán làm sao để giảm được cái dấu vết carbon trong cái chuỗi sản xuất cũng như chuỗi cung ứng của doanh nghiệp. Thì đấy là cái mà liên quan đến câu hỏi mà lúc đầu thì anh Frederick anh có hỏi câu thứ hai mà tôi cũng chưa kịp trả lời. Thì tôi cũng có một cái trao đổi là đây là một cái tín hiệu mà sẽ thúc đẩy cái quá trình mà giảm cái dấu vết carbon hay giảm phát thải carbon trên toàn cầu sẽ rất là mạnh mẽ trong thời gian tới bằng cái chính sách gọi là chính sách định giá carbon. Cái chính sách này thì nó trước đây thì chỉ nằm ở các quốc gia phát triển, nhưng mà tuy nhiên đối với các cái cơ chế chính sách, đặc biệt là bắt đầu từ thỏa thuận Paris cho đến nay và đặc biệt cái cam kết tại COP26 của các nguyên thủ quốc gia thì cho thấy rằng cái xu thế và cái định hướng về giảm phát thải khí nhà kính thông qua các nhiều biện pháp, trong đó có biện pháp về định giá carbon. Có nghĩa rằng khi chúng ta phát thải carbon, chúng ta sẽ phải chi trả bằng tiền nếu như chúng ta không có những cái biện pháp giảm nhẹ. Và nhìn nhận về vấn đề như vậy thì về phía chính phủ Việt Nam thì chúng tôi cũng đang, Bộ Công Thương cũng đang tham mưu cho chính phủ và Thủ tướng Chính phủ trong việc là tổ chức và triển khai các cái chương trình hành động, các cái hoạt động mà đào tạo, tập huấn, nâng cao nhận thức cho cộng đồng doanh nghiệp và các cái cơ quan quản lý ở các địa phương. Họ nhận thức được rõ những cái tầm nhìn dài hạn và những cơ hội và thách thức trong cái quá trình mà họ phải thực hiện những cái nghĩa vụ về giảm phát thải khí nhà kính. Và để làm những việc này thì chúng tôi cũng đã có nhiều các hoạt động, đặc biệt là sự hỗ trợ của cộng đồng quốc tế, và hiện nay là chúng tôi đang triển khai các cái chương trình như là chương trình đối tác năng lượng Việt Nam Đan Mạch mà chúng tôi cũng đang triển khai với Đại sứ quán Đan Mạch ở Việt Nam để thúc đẩy các cái doanh nghiệp mà tiêu thụ năng lượng trọng điểm tìm các cái giải pháp để sử dụng hiệu quả năng lượng và giảm cái dấu vết carbon trong cái chuỗi cung ứng của mình. Và đối với lại các cái cơ sở mà doanh nghiệp vừa và nhỏ thì tôi nghĩ rằng là cái dự thảo thông tư của Bộ Công Thương mà sẽ ban hành trong tháng 11 năm nay á, thì nó sẽ hướng dẫn cho tất cả các ngành, các lĩnh vực thực hiện các cái nghĩa vụ về kiểm kê, kiểm soát phát thải khí nhà kính trong cái quá trình sản xuất của mình. Thì theo quy định của luật thì chỉ những cái doanh nghiệp mà nằm trong quyết định số 01 của Thủ tướng Chính phủ mới phải thực hiện nghĩa vụ bắt buộc về kiểm kê và báo cáo các kết quả giảm nhẹ, cũng như là thực hiện các cái kế hoạch hành động giảm nhẹ phát thải khí nhà kính của cơ sở, nhưng có thể áp dụng được cho các cái đối tượng nằm ngoài cái quy định của phạm vi luật điều chỉnh. Có nghĩa là trong thông tư thì chúng tôi cũng đưa ra những cái nội dung về khuyến khích các cái doanh nghiệp mà vừa và nhỏ có thể áp dụng những cái quy định này để từng bước kiểm soát cái phát thải khí nhà kính tại cơ sở. Và trong trường hợp mà các cái chính sách định giá carbon như kiểu CBAM thì họ lại không quy định đối tượng là doanh nghiệp nhỏ hay là to, hay là doanh nghiệp lớn hay doanh nghiệp vừa và nhỏ. Thì do vậy là tôi nghĩ rằng là cái thông tư của các bộ ngành, trong đó có Bộ Công Thương, cũng sẽ góp một cái phần nào cho các doanh nghiệp của chúng ta có những cái phương pháp để chúng ta tính toán được cái, kiểm soát được cái mức phát thải carbon trong cái chuỗi cung ứng của mình. Và những vấn đề mà lớn nhất ở đây mà tôi nghĩ rằng là chủ đề từ phiên sáng cũng như bây giờ, đó là vấn đề về tài chính và công nghệ, để giúp cho cộng đồng doanh nghiệp và những cái cơ sở để chúng ta có cái cơ hội chuyển đổi, chuyển dịch năng lượng và giảm được phát thải khí nhà kính trong ngắn hạn, trung hạn và dài hạn. Thì đối với nội dung này tôi nghĩ rằng là cái nguồn lực về của quốc tế, của các cái hỗ trợ kỹ thuật cũng rất là cần thiết để cho giúp Việt Nam trong thời gian tới. Và trong luật bảo vệ môi trường 2020 ấy, thì cũng có quy định về các cái quy định về tín dụng xanh, về trái phiếu xanh. Thì cái việc này nó do Bộ Tài chính và Ngân hàng Nhà nước đang chủ trì để triển khai. Thì cái đấy tôi nghĩ rằng là đấy là những cái cơ chế chính sách song hành cùng với những cái hỗ trợ của cộng đồng quốc tế thì sẽ giúp, hy vọng sẽ giúp cho Việt Nam, đặc biệt là cộng đồng doanh nghiệp vừa và nhỏ, sẽ thích ứng được với những cái chính sách mới của toàn cầu cũng như của quốc gia trong cái vấn đề về giảm dấu vết carbon trong chuỗi cung ứng của mình. Xin cảm ơn.
Thank you. And I think you covered a little bit the topic of cooperation with Denmark, which brings me to a very good, let's say, preview for my next question to Jennifer, Ms. Pam. Yeah, and I think maybe you can expand a little bit on that, yeah? Especially with the upcoming plans on the EU Green Deal that might impact Vietnam. How do you recommend expanding, and maybe share a little bit of that capacity building and training that you guys are working on together with the MOIT on sustainability and due diligence to minimize impact and improve support to both EU FDIs and also Vietnamese companies? Yeah, please, Ms. Pam. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think my co-panelists from MIT outlined very, very clearly what the priorities ought to be for Vietnamese businesses in order to be able to comply and live up to the requirements that are coming from the EU. And of course, we have an optimistic take on the potential that CBAM can bring in terms of a sustainable transformation. We do see in the future that there's more incentives for adopting clean technology, for collecting the data and reporting the data necessary for us to be able to make the transformation. But we also recognize, of course, that this isn't going to just happen, that there is going to be a strong need for technical support as well as financial support. So in having this partnership that was mentioned between Denmark and Vietnam, that focuses a lot on the technical component. It focuses a lot on knowledge sharing and making sure that we are able to transfer some of the knowledge we've gathered over the past decades, that we're able to share some of the best practices from implementing clean energy initiatives in Denmark, that those are able to be applied elsewhere as well. I mentioned technical support. I also, of course, should mention financial support, because access to green finance, we recognize that that is a huge challenge for many companies, especially the SMEs. So here we see a lot of the focus in the EU, that is increasingly being given to access to finance as well, to make sure that that doesn't become a barrier in the sustainable transformation. Now, we've talked a lot about sort of what we can do government to government, and how the EU can step in and provide more guidance on the implementation of CBAM, but we also, I will hold this closer. But we also see companies and collaboration between companies having a big role here. And I think our guidance to those companies is to focus on especially 5 key areas in their collaboration. The first one, I'd say, is knowledge transfer between EU companies and their Vietnamese counterparts, for example. It is critical that all companies, that all partners in a global supply chain, that they each have a clear understanding of the requirements that are coming, and they're each able to contribute the information and the data that's necessary in living up to those requirements. And here I do see that the companies that have greater possibility, greater opportunity to access relevant information, that they share that with their partners to the extent possible. Then I think a second priority is to actually engage in more detailed supply chain auditing and assessment, understanding, as we've talked about, that Scope 1 and Scope 2 doesn't cut it anymore, that there's a need for greater scrutiny of Scope 3. That doesn't happen without very, very detailed analysis of the full supply chain. So that would be a second priority. The third one, of course, is investment in technology. And here, I think some companies in the supply chain, they have better resources, they have better opportunities for being able to invest in the technology that's necessary to bring them into the CBAM era, so to say. And here there is a need for sharing. There is the need for technical support, exactly as we've already talked about, between government to government. We see that need in business to business as well. Fourthly, there is a need for more environmental sustainability initiatives. My co-panelist Florian before talked about how this isn't new, right? That we've had business ethics, we've had CSR, we've had RBC for a long time. All of these initiatives that have been voluntary for a very long time. I think now we're shifting our mindset to this being very mandatory. It is something, investing in, for example, circular economy, investing in proper waste management, investing in energy efficiency. Those are going to be the initiatives that are going to make it possible for us to be able to live up to future requirements. So the initiatives underlying those goals, we're going to see a higher frequency of them. And then finally, as a concrete sort of priority for more companies to look at in their collaboration is certification and compliance assistance. Certification doesn't bring you 100% of the way, of course. You can't get a certification and then say, all right, we live up to all of the requirements, especially not because we know that there are more requirements coming. However, it does give you an outline, it does give you a framework that's very, very helpful in going forward. And again, not all companies are that easily able to access the certification opportunities necessary. They don't necessarily have the resources for being able to comply immediately. And here we also see a need for more long-term and closer collaboration between European and Vietnamese businesses to be able to achieve that.
Much, yeah, Jennifer. I pick up two things, right? One is on really technology, yeah, transfer of technology from Europe. I think that's very interesting, and also sharing a lot of best practices. And maybe I go to Miss Berger Helen, because you know, one of the things that we did collaboration with my company, and I was researching on this. There was a technology called shark's fin technology. Yeah, so it's using biomimicry. So what you do is you copy the shark skin design and apply it in an aircraft. Yeah, and Airbus is doing that together with some of our engineers. So, but I know that's just one small item out of your 5 levers of decarbonization. Maybe you can share us some of these levers. Apart from the technology design, what are the other things that you're doing to really address decarbonization and share it across to the industries, especially in Vietnam? Thank you.
Yes, sure. So as I mentioned, and you highlighted, Scope 3 is our largest challenges, and I mentioned we committed to reduce by 46% by 2050. So how do we achieve this? Airbus is an innovative company. That is our DNA. We invent new technology. So even though you briefly mentioned some topics, but when we look at 2050 net zero target, over 34% will come from new technologies, and it's continuous technology improvement as well as disruptive technologies. So you mentioned one technology. We're also working on sharklet, just a new aircraft, a new generation aircraft, as my colleague mentioned, just bring immediate carbon reduction, and that's a key lever. But because we love to innovate, this is really our DNA, we're also working on really disruptive technologies like new wing designs and hydrogen-powered aircraft. And as Airbus, we committed to bring the hydrogen-powered aircraft to the world in 2035. So that's a major part on how to reduce decarbonization is to innovate, to adopt new technologies. Another lever is to review operations. How do we operate? How the aircraft are operated in the sky, at the airport. On our scope 1 and 2 is also how do we operate? How do we do our operations to reduce waste, to reduce our carbon footprint? And then the third lever that was mentioned before is the use of sustainable aviation fuel. So it's an alternative fuel to Jet A1 that will reduce the world CO2 emission in aviation. And as Airbus, we use it in our operation. We fly with SAF for our test flight, for our delivery to the customers, even in our own supply chain. You know, we have a small airline. We fly our parts all across Europe to our final assembly line in those very big beluga aircraft. And that's where we use SAF. So this is the kind of levers that we use in Airbus to support the decarbonization of the industry.
Thank you, Ms. Berger. Yeah, and then maybe I jump into Vietnam Airlines. Apart from the sustainable aviation fuels, are there any initiatives that Vietnam Airlines is doing to address this decarbonization and really meeting these net zero targets that's committed by the government? Maybe you can add in a few more. Yeah, thanks.
Actually, the airlines also share the 5 levels, the same as the OEM companies like the Airbus. In terms of the technology, Vietnam Airlines, we also renovate our aircraft recently using the new generation aircraft. Since 2015, we introduced the new aircraft, new generation aircraft, the Boeing 787, the Airbus 350. And Vietnam Airlines also among the very first carrier renovate the wide body aircraft, and we are also renovating the narrow body to the 321, the Airbus 321 Neo. It is the first thing that we have done in terms of among the 5 levels. For the operation efficiency, we also optimizing thanks to the IT and the digital tools, optimizing the operation at the airport and also the flight route to reduce the fuel consumption. And in the last 5 years, each year we have reduced about 0.5 to 1% of the average fuel consumption. The third one is about the SAF usage. Actually, for the time being, only the flight from Vietnam to, actually from Europe to Vietnam, that we are now using the SAF as the requirement of the EU government. But Vietnam Airlines is also in the very initial state discussion with the aircraft OEM about for the production and distribution of SAF in Vietnam. About the Vietnam Airlines also have just set up the ESG committee in Vietnam with in Vietnam Airlines with the participation of the all top management of Vietnam Airlines. So and of course decarbonization is also the key topic of the ESG committee.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chum. So I'll ask 2 more questions to the panel, and I would like to open the floor for questions, to everyone here. So please prepare, and I'll just ask 2 more questions to our 2 panelists that have not had a chance to answer the second one, right? So maybe to Dr. Tien, in terms of CBAM looking from a perspective of other countries, yeah, because CBAM is very focused on Europe. Yeah, do you see other countries, for example, US is now, call on this Clean Competition Act. Do you see that happening? Any other, implications that you see for Vietnam government and Vietnam businesses for other CBAM, like, let's say, I wouldn't say trade control, but more trade initiatives or regulations? Yeah, please, Dr. Tien.
Thank you for the question. I think that the CBAM will certainly will be expanded to other product of the export to the EU, because it's a part of the EU Green Deal, and the objective of the EU is for the net zero. So certainly it will be expanded to other product. The second point is a similar initiative will be adopted by other countries as well, because the climate change, the decarbonization is the global issue, and a lot of the countries have committed for the net zero in the COP convention, COP26. For the big country, I think like the US, you mentioned about the US Clean Competition Act, or the Canada or the UK is the big country. I think that they imported a lot of the manufacturing product. So they certainly will have a similar to CBAM initiative in order to make the competition is a fair in terms of the CO2 emission, in terms of the carbonization, fair between the importer and the domestic producer. So certainly it will be expanded. For other countries, I think that it depends, especially for the developing country, I think it depends on their current carbonization problem, so they may be adopted or they may be implemented, follow the regulation of the big exporter like the EU or the US or UK. The second part is about the implication or the recommendation for the government and the business. So I think that understanding that the CBAM will certainly should be expanded. So it is we need to be as quick as possible to implement the CBAM similar regulation. We discussed a lot in the previous panel and also this panel about how we implement that, and we need to be very quick. Otherwise, when we export the product to the country abroad, we will have to pay the offset of the carbon tax. So we will lost the revenue, and it will affected the competitiveness of Vietnam. And if we compare to other competitor, other developing country, that is current the competitor of Vietnam, like the China, like the India. Even though the China or the India is the currently they emit more carbon than Vietnam because of the size of the economy, but they are somehow they have already have some action already, and to some extent we are a little bit like behind. So we need to be very quick. The second recommendation is from the answer of the MOIT and from other panelists as well. We see it seems that we are still a kind of a lack of the international standard on how we apply the CBAM initiative, CBAM line initiative. Lack of the international standard on how we measure the decarbonization effort. For example, the big country or all the SME and the big country, the big company. So the lack of the international standard. So the second recommendation, I think that we need to have a lot of the kind of dialogue or negotiation. So from each view of each perspective of each country, we can discuss on how we can compare, how we can synchronize those things. For example, even though in Vietnam, we are currently focused on the big building, on the big corporation, but we can discuss how the carbon credit can be used as the evidence or the to reduce the carbon tax in the CBAM plan. Those are the things that I think that given the lack of the internet standard, we can talk, we can dialogue, and we can reach the consensus. So it is second recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tien. Then I go to probably the more concluding question for Florian, right? Because you have a lot of experience on stakeholder analysis. Maybe you can share your experience with this in past supply chain compliance and integrated strategy development. How to inform you about the need for an inclusive and multi-stakeholder approach in the net zero transition. Yeah. Thanks, Florian.
Thank you very much. I would like to demonstrate this need of multi-stakeholder engagement on the example of CBAM. CBAM is, and I think our colleague from, the distinguished guest from MOIT knows that there are lots of disputes about that on the global stage. So this is nothing which is welcomed everywhere. CBAM is highly disputed on many stages, and most recently also strongly under the WTO. And I'm quite sure MOIT was taking part in this discussion, or is actively taking part in this discussion. Just recently I was watching, it was end of September, and there very strong statements were coming from developing countries saying, guys, stop with that. We cannot do this unilaterally. We have to find mechanisms. We have to find mechanisms. This was mainly raised by African countries, by the BRICS countries, but mainly the developing world, which is highlighting also the need, what Jennifer was saying, what Europe has to offer. This is not something you can just impose and say, you have to follow this if you want to export to Europe. And others say, okay, if you want our stuff, then you also please have to talk at least to us closely. And that, I think, will happen to CBAM over the next 4, 6, 8 years, that this will lead into a global system, hopefully, and I'm really confident that that EU was the initial, or gave this spark to get this discussion running. CBAM will not look like we think now. It will look different, I'm absolutely sure. And it will need this dialogue on a top level, so that it really is not seen by too many countries as an unilaterally imposed European trade barrier, which is seen today strongly. But on the other hand, also it needs the dialogue between companies, and this has to start now. What you said is the overall dialogue, but really company to company, because when we talk about the data points, and you mentioned data, all mentioned we need data. Don't forget, a lot of these data are company secrets. They will not share these data about their supply chain, how they do what, where. So this has to be done in closed cycles, and this will be the big challenge, that Europe is keeping the lead on that by leading as an example of collaboration, of active dialogue, of data sharing, of knowledge sharing, and also of access to finance. And you mentioned this is one thing I would really like to highlight. The access to finance for that can happen in two ways. Either I help companies with green loans, green bonds, and so on, to do the necessary investments, or what would be also another way, in particular also when it comes around ESG, a little bit the lower hanging fruits of sustainability, just pay the adequate premium price for these products. So I think this is what Europe can stand for. And this is, I think, Europe can contribute to make CBAM a success story and not an approach dead on arrival. And this will be decided really in the next 2-3 years how this is working out. I'm very confident that Vietnam is ready to be a partner of Europe, doing this example, but also I call on all Europeans, we need to give something in and not just relying on the EU delegation or on some EU funds. Every company, everybody has to pay a price for that to finally get where we want to, a greener environment and a good future for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Florian. So I'll open the floor to questions. We have probably a few minutes. Yeah, any first volunteer, please? Yeah. And you can address the questions to a specific speaker if you want. Yeah, then that makes it easier for us. Thank you.
Thank you for the sharing today. So much information. And I have 2 questions. The first question is for Dr. Tien. We talk about the impact of CBAM. You said that it's not significant now in Vietnam. But in actual that we have the third production capacity in terms of cement in the world, and 13 in terms of capacity of steel in the world, and we have a lot of important exports in steel. So CBAM will have the progress from the 2026 to 2034. So when you think that it will be have the enough impacts for the oil company producer in Vietnam to take action in the energy transition and decarbonization. And I have one more question for Mr. Tâm. We talk about the decree 01 to ask the manufacturer to declare about the measurement of the CO2 emission and the strategy to decarbonization. But do we have any, we have a really clear deadline, but do we have any kind of the subsidy or penalty if the manufacturers do not submit the right time and do not measure the CO2 emission? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Yeah, the steel is one of the big sector of Vietnam. However, currently, if we the research contracted by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, the MORE, there are 2 reasons that the impact on the steel is not big. The first one is about the resources. It's applied to only the sector. Because when the CBAM is applied by the EU, the resources, the company will certainly divert the resources to other sector. So the output for of the steel sector is decreased a little bit, but the output of other sector is reduce a bigger number. And the second reason is about the market. At this moment, when we run the model, the EU is the only country that apply the CBAM similar thing. So if we create the impact that the producer and the exporter will divert the export of steel to other markets, so in order to avoid paying the CBAM carbon tax. So that's why the current impact is quite small. But as I mentioned earlier, in the future, when the CBAM line is the carbon tax will be applied by other countries, there will be no opportunity for divert of the export market, so the impact will be more serious. Yeah, thank you.
Hello. Ok. Vâng, xin cảm ơn câu hỏi của bạn. Thực ra thì trong cái quyết định số 01 ấy, quy định danh mục các cái cơ sở phát thải khí nhà kính phải kiểm kê khí nhà kính thì phải có trách nhiệm kiểm kê khí nhà kính và thực hiện các cái kế hoạch giảm nhẹ phát thải nhà kính. Tuy nhiên thì đây là một cái nội dung mà rất là mới, lần đầu tiên mà Việt Nam chúng ta thực hiện đối với cấp cơ sở và cấp lĩnh vực. Thế do vậy là trong cái nghị định 06 của chính phủ cũng đã có đưa ra một cái lộ trình để cho các doanh nghiệp chúng ta từng bước thực hiện các cái quy định về database, tức là cái liên quan đến chuẩn bị số liệu, tính toán phát thải, rồi nộp các cái báo cáo. Và cái lộ trình này rất là rõ. Nếu các bạn đọc kỹ trong cái nghị định 06 thì đầu tiên là cái mốc 31 tháng 3 năm 2023 là các cái cơ sở nằm trong quyết định số 01 của Thủ tướng Chính phủ ấy, sẽ phải nộp cái báo cáo, tức là cái số liệu hoạt động liên quan đến sử dụng năng lượng này, liên quan đến phát thải khí nhà kính tại cơ sở, gửi cho các bộ quản lý lĩnh vực, trong đó có Bộ Công Thương. Bộ Công Thương thì quản lý 1.662 cơ sở. Thì 31 tháng 3 vừa rồi chúng tôi đã có cái văn bản gửi cho các ủy ban dân các tỉnh và 1.662 cơ sở đó để họ nộp cái số liệu lần đầu về cho Bộ Công Thương để chúng tôi tiến hành tính toán kiểm kê, ước tính cái mức phát thải khí nhà kính ở từng cơ sở. Và như vậy là cái mốc đầu tiên là doanh nghiệp chúng ta chỉ phải nộp cái số liệu hoạt động thôi, và trong đó thì cái số liệu hoạt động như thế nào thì chúng tôi đã có cái văn bản và có mẫu để doanh nghiệp chỉ việc điền và gửi về. Thế và cái mốc tiếp theo là cái mốc vào ngày 31 tháng 3 năm 2024 thì doanh nghiệp phải tiến hành, phải nộp cái báo cáo kiểm kê khí nhà kính của năm 2022. Có nghĩa rằng các quý vị sẽ có từ năm 2022 đến năm 2024 để chúng ta, tức là 23 đến 24 để chúng ta tiến hành kiểm kê theo cái phương pháp mà các thông tư các bộ ngành sẽ ban hành, và Bộ Công Thương sẽ ban hành cái thông tư đó vào tháng 11 năm nay. Thì bắt đầu năm 2024 các quý vị sẽ sử dụng cái thông tư đó để tính toán và nộp cái báo cáo kiểm kê lần đầu vào tháng 31 tháng 3 năm 2024 theo cái quy định của thông tư cũng như theo quy định của nghị định chính phủ, nghị định số 06 của chính phủ. Thì do vậy là cái mốc thời gian các anh các chị, các doanh nghiệp cũng sẽ có thời gian để chúng ta thực hành. Và trong năm 2024 thì Bộ Công Thương cũng như các bộ ngành như Bộ Tài nguyên Môi trường và các bộ ngành sẽ tổ chức các cái khóa đào tạo, tập huấn, hướng dẫn và có thể phát triển các cái sổ tay để giúp cho các cái ngành lĩnh vực chúng ta áp dụng cho nó đúng cái quy định về kiểm kê, về MRV cho các hoạt động giảm nhẹ. Thì đấy là cái mốc mà doanh nghiệp phải thực hiện. Thế thì trong cái quy định về doanh nghiệp phải thực hiện thì có thêm một cái điểm nữa, đó là cái kế hoạch giảm nhẹ phát thải khí nhà kính và cái báo cáo kết quả giảm nhẹ thì cũng sẽ bắt đầu thực hiện từ năm 2025 quý vị mới phải nộp. Bởi vì là khi đó là theo quy định của nghị định 06 ấy, thì các cái cơ sở phát thải khí nhà kính phải thực hiện cái tuân thủ cái kế hoạch giảm nhẹ và phải báo cáo kết quả giảm nhẹ hàng năm, bắt đầu từ năm 2026 cho đến 2030 là các quý vị sẽ phải nộp hàng năm cái báo cáo kết quả giảm nhẹ. Cũng về kiểm kê thì để báo cáo 2 năm một lần, nhưng mà về kết quả giảm nhẹ thì báo cáo 1 năm một lần, nhưng lại thực hiện từ 2026. Và khi đó cũng là cái thời điểm mà Việt Nam dự kiến là theo quy định tại nghị định 06 thì cũng dự kiến sẽ vận hành thí điểm cái thị trường carbon nội địa ở trong nước và sẽ vận hành một cách đầy đủ vào 2028. Thì đấy là những cái mốc mà các anh các chị có thể lưu ý. Điểm thứ hai liên quan đến quy định về xử phạt. Thì theo cái nghị định số 17 năm 2022, tôi không nhớ chính xác lắm, nghị định về xử phạt các quy định về vi phạm hành chính trong lĩnh vực bảo vệ môi trường thì cũng có quy định một số cái nội dung liên quan đến các cái nghĩa vụ nếu như mà doanh nghiệp không tuân thủ cái quy định về kiểm kê, nộp các loại báo cáo và thực hiện các cái biện pháp giảm nhẹ thì cũng sẽ có những cái chế tài xử phạt. Tôi không nhớ chính xác cái là bao nhiêu tiền một cái hành vi, nhưng mà tóm lại là cũng có quy định về xử phạt và cũng có những quy định liên quan đến chế tài. Thế nhưng mà tôi nghĩ rằng là cái chế tài mạnh nhất đối với doanh nghiệp chính là cái hình ảnh của mình. Khi mà chúng ta có những cái vi phạm mà bị công bố thì nó làm giảm đi cái hình ảnh, cái uy tín của doanh nghiệp, thì cái đấy là cái hình phạt mà lớn hơn cả. Thì tôi cho rằng là đấy là những cái điểm mà muốn nêu nhấn mạnh trong cái diễn đàn hôm nay. Vâng, xin cảm ơn.
Yeah, thank you. As you can see, time flew very fast, so I would unfortunately stop questions for here, but I think a lot of our speakers will still be available in the next few hours here. So I only encourage you to approach them, introduce yourself, exchange business cards, and continue the dialogue as we move along in this journey towards sustainability. Thank you again so much to all our speakers, and thank you for the audience for participating and listening for us over the next, over the last 1.5 hours or so. So please feedback to the Eurocham team, also to the GGSC if there's any suggestions that you may have as we prepare for GFE for 2024. So thank you so much and see you in the next panels. Yeah, thank you.